This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Here's your host, Brandon Contes.
Alrighty, welcome to episode 75 of the Awful Announcing Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Contes, and this week we are joined by longtime ESPN announcer and radio play-by-play voice of the New York Jets, Bob Wischusen. Bob, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. We knew the Jets were going to be a big story this season. Here we are 11 weeks into the season, the bye week for the Jets, and they certainly they remain a story, but probably not for any of the reasons that we expected before the season started. At what point did you start to realize this was going to be a bad football team? Like, was it last week? Was it when Aaron Rodgers was in Egypt? When did that start to set in?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me.
Of course.
The day after a loss like that, voice of the Jets, and as a broadcaster going on to a podcast called Awful Announcing. So this really checks all the boxes for me on a Monday, right? It's like being a maid going on a broadcast called Dirty Rooms, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, you did a bad job cleaning up. I've tried to stay optimistic and have tried to stay optimistic about them as long as I possibly could. And I've kind of waited for that magical Aaron Rodgers moment to take place. And unfortunately for them, it just hasn't happened.
Yeah.
They have, as hard as this is to believe based on their record, they still have the DNA of being a good team. They have been, a play or two, a series or two, this close, if you go back through their season, to their record being inverted.
Yeah.
That's the hardest part of the record that they sit here with now. If you go back game by game, but look, they're 3-8. So on a week-by-week basis, I have gone into every game thinking they've got Aaron Rodgers, they've got all this talent on offense. Their defense, outside of last week's game against Arizona, has pretty much held them in every game and given them a chance to win. At some point with this offense, the switch will flip. They will score points and they will start to string wins together. And it just hasn't happened. And now the last couple of weeks, of course, really, I guess the recipe for a lost season when you're almost finding ways to lose.
Right.
And yesterday, the offense gives them what they needed, right? It scores second half points. It gives them points at the end of the game. It stretches the lead to the opposition needing a touchdown, puts it on the defense, and then the defense gives it up at the end of the year, at the end of the game. So, yeah, it's not like one seminal moment where I sat there and said, this is going to be one of those years. But now the record has tilted to the point where it can't not be, right? They can win every game the rest of the way, and they still might miss the playoffs because 9-8 is the best they can be.
Yeah. And I think that's the problem is now that the finding ways to lose is just like that's the DNA of a bad football team. And it just seems like every single week they even when there's a moment where it looks like they're going to win, they find a way to drop that game. And that's exactly what happened yesterday against the Colts. When Rodgers got here, he talked about wanting to add to the lone Lombardi trophy and talked about wanting to change the culture and talked about the team needing to learn how to win and learn how to dominate. Do you think at this point that Rodgers, is he looking at this and it's just saying, well, this is part of that process, or is he now realizing that maybe he's not up to the task at 41 years old?
I don't know. You'd probably have to ask him. That's a good question. There's already been stories written about him coming back next year, right? He's got a ton of money owed to him next year. They take a huge cap hit. And I know there are ways that you can let a player go and then break a cap hit up over a couple of years, so there are ways to doctor that, but it would be painful both ways.
Yeah.
If they parted ways next year. So I don't know. That's a good question. They basically have every guy that he's wanted to bring here and, every kind of pathway to making it as comfortable for him as they could, they've given him. And it just hasn't materialized. So what happens going forward, how he views this, I mean, I think he's as shell-shocked as anyone that this hasn't come together. Because if you go back to training camp, I think he started the season thinking they were going to be one of those handful of teams that could go out and win it all.
What were your thoughts when Robert Saleh got fired?
I always go back to something that Jeff Van Gundy once told me a long time ago. I had a conversation with him. I think it's almost all the way back when Bobby Valentine got fired by the Mets. I mean, he was the coach of the Knicks at the time. We circled back to that a few years later, and he put it well that, I think I've got his wording correctly. It's almost verbatim, if it's not verbatim, that teams fire coaches to almost give the illusion of change when real change in a season is almost impossible. I mean, how do you really change a team? You change the team. Well, the team is the team. The players are the players. Your offensive line, your offensive line. Your defense is your defense. You can bring a Devontae Adams in. You can make a move. But it's a 53-man team, and 46 of them are going to be on the field every week. Those are your guys.
Yeah.
So go through history. How many times has a team changed coaches during a season, and has that turned then into the magic wand waved over a roster that then is going to, in any sport, that then propels a team to flipping their season, winning a championship? I mean, normally, the truth is kind of told with the players on the field and how they're performing. But at the same time, you're an owner and you're presented with that reality. What button can you push? You are faced with the reality, like, I can't go fire my offensive line. I can't fire all of my defense. Like, I can't do that. There's only really one button I can push to try and light that fire, to try and spark the locker room, kick everyone in the proverbial rear end. And so that's what they tried to do. Did I think it was going to have any massive change on their season? I thought their season would be written or not based on if Aaron Rodgers was going to turn into Aaron Rodgers and get the offense going.
Yeah.
Because if you go back for the 5 games that Robert Saleh coached the team, it basically was the same kind of, the defense hanging in there for as long as they could, waiting for the offense to click, and then the offense kind of not holding up their end. And now, they found different ways to lose, but the handful of games right after Robert Saleh was let go, the same theme kind of continued.
Yeah, no, it definitely, like, NFL teams, it happens a little bit more in baseball and basketball, but NFL teams don't fire head coaches midseason and then make legitimate runs toward the Super Bowl. So it felt like a really damning assessment of the team after just 5 weeks.
Well, and really, I mean, look at the roster, right? Look at what they've done. When you bring in Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses on the offensive line, and you have Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, and you bring in his receiving core, and, you've got some aging players in the front 7 on defense as well, but you've got some guys right in the prime of their career as well. Like, you just paid Quinnen Williams, and you've got some really talented guys at corner. Like, they have taken this young core and supplemented it with Aaron Rodgers, his guys on offense. They thought they fixed the offensive line, and they were all in. And so when the whole mentality is, we're all in, we've done everything that we possibly can to put this roster in the best position we feel to make a run, well, you are literally going to throw every single last thing at the wall that you can throw to try and make it happen. That was the last button to push. You can't go out and all of a sudden sign 10 new free agents once the season has started. You can't change your team. You can't flip the roster's the roster. So that was it. They pushed the one button that they could push, and it really hasn't worked any better than it was working, unfortunately, before. In almost statistically, if you look at it, it's gotten harder for them to win.
Yeah. What has been harder to watch? The sort of slow death that this season has been, or the more gut punch last year when Rodgers tore his Achilles?
Oh, I mean, geez. right. Like, I mean, death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? Like that's like the scene in Moneyball, right? Would you rather
Yeah.
get one to the head or a bunch to the stomach and bleed to death, right? I mean, neither is really appealing, right? So I will be the eternal optimist. I grew up as a Jets fan. I am now obviously employed by the team, but I am lifelong friends with people in that building whose daily jobs, 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year, all tied up in this silly sport of football where they're trying to desperately win these games. And I know how much it means to all of them. So I'm always going to kind of maintain optimism and start thinking already about what could happen for next year. Could they draft a quarterback? Where are they going to end up? Who can they bring in? And now, who knows what the front office, the coaching staff is going to look like next year. At some point, I tell my kids, it's hard for them to imagine, but when I was their age, Patriots fans would go to a half-empty stadium with bags over their heads, right? Like they were the laughing stock joke franchise of the NFL. It changes. It can change. It is possible. You can put the right people in place and the script can flip. So you got to keep holding out hope that it will.
Yeah. I think that's why I think this season has been worse for me, because like when Rodgers got hurt last year, I kept trying to just wake myself up and say there's no way this is how the season is going to go after four plays. But for me, this year is still worse because throughout all of last season, I still had that hope for this season.
Sure.
Like that thought that, Rodgers was going to come back and be the quarterback this season and all would be well. And just to see that it hasn't been the case. I think this has been the toughest season for me to watch that I can remember. I was only 8 in 96, 7 in 95. So I didn't really grasp
Ouch.
the frustration as much of a 1 in 15, 3 and 13 season that they had with Kotite. But this one has been painful.
My first year covering the Jets on what was basically a full-time basis was year 2 of Rich Kotite. So the 1996 football season, baptism by fire. I grew up a Jet fan, so you'd seen it all.
Yeah.
But of course, I had seen it as a fan from a distance. You could divorce yourself from it. The game was over, or they're down 31-10 in the fourth quarter. I could turn off the TV. Nope. Since 1996, every play, I'm there. So I felt it all. So that was my first season of every snap of Jet football, as covering the team was 1996, 1 in 15. So, but saw Bill Parcells come in and completely and totally, in almost one fell swoop, flip the entire organization to a totally different mentality. Now, do they need that type of an all-encompassing personality to come in and do the same thing? Maybe. That might be the best chance that you have to get it back on track. But it is possible. I've seen it. I was there firsthand when it happened.
Yeah. Do you think that Rodgers will have influence over what the Jets do this offseason? Like if he says he'll only play for Jeff Ulbrich, do the Johnsons listen to that? Should they listen to that at this point, in your opinion? Or has Rodgers started to play his way out of holding influence?
No, you can't make that decision, because best case scenario, how many more years does Aaron Rodgers play? Like if they won a championship next year and he decided he wanted to play one more year as like a victory lap year, maybe he plays 2 more years. He may not play 1 more year. Whoever you hire, you're hoping is going to be the regime for 10 years, right? You're hoping it's finally going to be the solution. And it's going to be, your Parcells, your Belichick, your Andy Reid. Like you're hoping the next group that you bring in is always going to be that group that's going to win and stay. So you can't make a decision based on a player that you think, and I don't even think he would have make that demand. I mean, he's smart enough to know that, I can't walk down the hall and say, I'm only playing for this guy. Well, you're not going to be here long enough, I would think, to have that kind of sway over the entire direction of the franchise 5, 7, 10 years down the road. So no, I think they need to make sure that whoever they hire of the same mindset as they are on him.
Yeah.
Because they owe him a ton of money. He's owed a ton of money. Apparently has said, and I wouldn't think from a pride or professional standpoint he wants to go out on this.
Yeah.
And I just like last year, he didn't want to go out on an injury. This probably to him feels worse. At least if you go out on an injury, it's an injury capping all of the previous success, all of the triumphs, the MVPs, a championship. Your place on Mount Rushmore is kind of unquestioned. You don't want the last year of your career to be remembered as a losing player. So I would think he'd be motivated even more so to try and come back and erase that next year. But that also means you have to have a coach that's on. But I did say this to somebody the other day. Let's say, just for the sake of argument, this season continues to go where it looks like it's going. And they, even if they go 500, they split these last 6 games.
Yeah.
And they end up as an 11, 12 loss team, somewhere in that range. That's going to put you within striking distance of a quarterback in this draft. I don't know. I mean, we'll see where they fall, where the chips fall, and who's available. Let's say, just for the sake of argument, though, whether it's Jordan Travis, who they drafted last year, who's been in that quarterback room with Aaron Rodgers for a year, or they draft his replacement in this draft. We collectively in the NFL, I say we as the NFL, I mean, I'm not the one making the decisions, but the philosophy with quarterbacks in the NFL has changed. These guys play, generally speaking, too young and too fast, and too much is asked of them. Too much is put on their shoulders. Now, you will get exceptions to the rule. You'll get Joe Burrows of the world that will come right out of the gate and right as rookies play great. But the lion's share of the guys, I think, that play well, and certainly play well for the franchise that actually drafted them, are guys that are not asked to play right away. Like Patrick Mahomes wasn't asked to play right away. He sat behind Alex Smith for a year. People almost forget that. He didn't immediately, and he was on a good team, right? That was a playoff team, and they still had him sit for a year. So a young quarterback spending a year behind Aaron Rodgers next year is not the worst scenario in the world. So, like that could work. That could be beneficial. So all of that has to kind of come together. But then, I know you need the synergy between him, the coach, whoever the new general manager is. If that ends up what happens, we'll see. We're kind of putting the cart before the horse, but there's a lot to still be decided. And who knows? I don't know how much these next 6 games is going to have a say in how they view the future as well.
So is that something, though, that you think could be appealing to a new coach, GM, front office, like coming in and saying, well, here you have Aaron Rodgers for 1 year. You can then pick the quarterback you want in the draft to be his successor, and then see how it goes with Rodgers in that one season, and then you kind of have almost a clean slate after that. I mean, it's not too dissimilar from Sean Payton having the 1 year with Russell Wilson. Didn't work out. They moved on, and now he has his guy in Bo Nix.
One thing that I've learned about coaches, people think of players as having big egos.
Yeah.
Coaches have egos every bit, if not bigger, than the players. So there will absolutely be coaches that will sit there and say, they've got Breece Hall, and they've got Garrett Wilson, and they still have Devontae Adams under contract, and they've got Quinnen Williams and Quincy Williams and Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed, and they've got all these guys. They still have Aaron Rodgers, and I've got a top 5 pick, and I can groom a young quarterback behind Aaron Rodgers. Yes, 100% there will be coaches that will say from their own ego, those guys couldn't do it. Deal me that hand, and I'll get it right. I'll show them. Now that doesn't mean necessarily that they can do it.
Yeah.
But there will absolutely be coaches that will sit there, look at the film, look at it from 30,000 feet, and pick apart all the things they think that another coaching staff did wrong, that they think they will do better, and that they could come in and succeed with.
Yeah.
So yes, there's no doubt that there will be, coaches that would look at that hand and say, yeah, like I would take a shot at that. I think.
I think though, the obvious issue is the problem with Aaron Rodgers more coaching induced, or is it that he's now approaching 41 years old?
I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think there's ever one answer to that
Yeah,
question.
I think and just recently the inability to get the ball down the field seems to be the most concerning part about his
Well,
age, I think.
I think there are systemic things involved. I mean, obviously at his age, he's been hit, he's
Yeah.
banged up. You can see he doesn't quite have the escapability. He's run a little bit, but he doesn't look like the 31-year-old Aaron Rodgers running
Yeah.
around the way he once did. But he still has an arm that should be able to beat you from the pocket. Or like there are quarterbacks that are winning in the NFL that don't run at all, that could just stand there,
Yeah.
move around a little bit, and just zip it and win that way. He can do that. I mean, you can see him throw it. So I do think that there will be a coach out there that will say, just give me Aaron Rodgers' right arm, and I can come up with a system that I can win with.
Do you think as a lifelong Jets fan, we'll say this, as a lifelong Jets fan, not as their play-by-play voice, but do you think that the Jets should run it back with Rodgers next season?
I don't know that they have a better option.
Yeah.
I would look at it as logically as possible.
Yeah.
And I do think that running it back with him next year could be a means to a different end. Like, who's the other quarterback option? So rather than just saying in a silo, do you run it back with Aaron Rodgers? What's choice B? Are you going to go sign Sam Darnold and bring him back? Like who are the other free agent quarterbacks that could be out there that they could bring in that would be a better option than Aaron Rodgers? Number one, who will they get? Where's their draft choice? What if they lose the last 6 games?
Yeah.
What if they have the number 1 pick in the draft and they draft Cam Ward and they bring him in? They, whoever the new GM is, if that's the way they go, falls in love with Cam Ward. He's our future, and then has the opportunity to say, sit him in Aaron Rodgers' room for a year. That could be very beneficial to a young quarterback. Don't go play right away, which is what they do. Wait, they did that with Mark Sanchez. They did that with Geno Smith. They did that with Sam Darnold. They did that with Zach Wilson. Any of those guys that are experiencing success right now, if they're still in the league and playing at all, are experiencing that success somewhere else.
Yeah.
Because they've gone through the meat grinder. They've got like the armadillo skin now, and now they've made their mistakes with the Jets, and now they've gone elsewhere. Well, don't do that. Right? Like, let that guy learn and only put him out there the way they put Chad Pennington out there when he was actually ready to go play. That's the last young quarterback that really was ready. I mean, Mark Sanchez won, yes, his first 2 years, but they didn't win because of him. They won in spite of him. They had a great run game, a great defense, and they did everything that they could to minimize his role. And then when it finally came time to say, all right, Mark, here are the keys to the car, they were like, oh, he's not ready for this. And they had to go all the way back to the way they tried to play before.
Right.
But now it was too late because they tried to surround him with all these weapons. And it kind of fell apart, and they became a losing team. So I would, again, endorse bringing Aaron Rodgers back if it meant there was a means to an end for the future. And I think there's a very logical script where that could take place. But who are they drafting? Who else are they bringing in? Like, what? There's way too much uncertainty as to what option B is to say right now.
Sure.
Aaron Rodgers next year, run it back and give it another try. And you also have to ask him honestly after this year. He does have to answer that question. Do you want to do this again?
Yeah. Are you surprised by Sam's success in Minnesota?
No, I'm not. I was always, of all of the guys that they had here, whether it was Zach Wilson, Mark, Geno Smith, like all of that kind of young run of quarterbacks, the one guy that I felt was left hung out to dry the most with no supporting cast whatsoever, and I always felt could play was Sam Darnold. And anybody that's heard me speak about it on the air, my opinion with him consistently over the years is that he was a starting caliber quarterback in the NFL. Now, to what level? Like, was he going to be a top 5 quarterback? Was he going to be an MVP candidate? Could you win a Super Bowl with him? I mean, though, it's hard to say what the ceiling of a player is. But in the 3 years, he was really the Jets starting quarterback. I mean, they tanked the last year that he was the quarterback, like to try to get Trevor Lawrence. They ended up with Zach Wilson.
Yep.
But they legitimately tanked the season.
Yeah. 0-13 start.
Exactly. So the years that he legitimately was the quarterback and they were trying to win with him, you can make an argument that Robbie Anderson was the most gifted offensive player that they gave him in the years that he was the starting quarterback. Robbie Anderson would be cut by this team, and this team's 3-8. He wouldn't make this team.
Yeah.
Not only would he not be a contributor, he would not have made the roster. That's the group he played with. So I'm not surprised at all that Darnold, and then he went to Carolina, threw a few balls to Christian McCaffrey. All of a sudden, Christian McCaffrey got hurt. And he ends up in San Francisco, and he was kind of in the exact same position in Carolina that he was with the Jets, right? Like a terrible offensive line, no supporting cast, and everybody's like, oh, Sam Darnold can't play. Well, wait a minute. Like, what hand are you dealing him? But he goes to San Francisco, spends a year kind of getting healthy and getting his mind right, and a really good coach to spend a year hanging out with and getting your mind right with. And now he's throwing the ball to a healthy Justin Jefferson. Yeah. Like, hey, deal me that hand if you're Sam Darnold. And now all of a sudden, oh, look at that. Sam Darnold can play. Wow. I always believed that he was a good player, and I just thought that he was always dealt a tough hand here.
Is the thought that Woody Johnson is going to get a position in the Trump administration?
I don't know that. I mean, I would say that that's likely, right? I mean, the last 4 years when, over the previous administration, when he was the ambassador to Great Britain, it seemed to be met with nothing but success. I'm not sure why the next go round they wouldn't at least offer it to him.
Yeah.
Would he accept and go back again and spend 4 more years, at his age doing that? I mean, again, he's 8 years younger when he took the job in the first place than he is right now. So that would probably have to be a question for him to answer as to whether or not he would automatically take that position. But I would not be at all surprised if it's offered. And from a presidential administration standpoint, I don't know the batting order. It seems like you deal with, really like the top on down. So you're starting chief of staff, defense secretary, secretary of state, right? Like you probably work your way down before you start naming ambassadors.
Yeah.
Especially to your most friendly, allies. But I would think in the not too distant future, you would probably want that position named. So, yeah, I mean, that certainly wouldn't surprise me at all if that's what happened.
How does Christopher Johnson differ from Woody as an owner?
I don't think tremendously. I mean, I think they both lean on their football people. They both, from my experience with them, are very extremely passionate, ardent rooters of the team that desperately want the team to win and desperately want to give the football people all of the resources necessary to win. But at the same time, like they don't certainly not one of the types of owner that like go into the scouting room or walk down to the general manager and start, flouting football knowledge as if they're football experts.
Yeah.
At all. Like they let the football people make the football decisions 100%. So everybody that I've always talked to has had nothing but, yes, they give us everything that we need, everything we ask for, we are given to succeed. So I see no reason why that would change from one to the other. Now the hiring process, will that change? That's a good question. I mean, they've tried, whether it's been Woody or Christopher, they've tried different processes in terms of hiring people. Whether it's like an outside firm or bringing in some consultants or things like that. what form that would take this time around, I don't know. And the one thing I would say about Joe Douglas, because everybody is very quick to just shovel dirt on the grave of a general manager when things look like this, and I get it. Obviously the Zach Wilson pick, it's hard to come back from that when you pick a quarterback and it doesn't work out. But if you look up and down the roster, Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, Will McDonald, what he turned into this year, when Elijah Vera Tucker stays healthy, like there are a lot of guys on this team that he's drafted. Sauce Gardner, he knows what a good football player looks like. He's drafted a lot of really, really good players to this team. When you get the quarterback wrong, that's the knife to the heart. That's the tough one to come back from. Would they give him another chance to draft a quarterback? That's probably the question they're going to have a reckoning with and ask, maybe before Woody takes an outside job, right? Before he makes the decision to leave. If they make, the two of them probably sitting in a room, what do we want to do here? And if we decide to do something, how are we then going to approach a new hire? And, all of that'll have to be fleshed out. But, but I guess in some defense of Joe Douglas, like there's a reason why they thought they were Aaron Rodgers away from competing for a championship. And that's because Joe Douglas built up every other position group on the team to a point where they thought they had, and everybody back in August thought they had a really, really good and complete roster.
Yeah.
And, a general manager should get at least some credit for that. So, maybe that's taken into account as well.
Yeah, right. And even Aaron Rodgers thought the Jets were an Aaron Rodgers away from winning. That's what appealed to him about coming here. What do you think the biggest issue is then with the Jets? Just not even just this season, but now going back the last 15 years or so, just the fact that they have owners who they desperately want to win. They're not if they're not too hands-on where it becomes a negative. They give the team the resources. They give they're willing to spend money. Like, why is it not working?
The hardest part, and this is what makes this year so frustrating, is that they never had the synergy of roster and quarterback. Right? I mean, the last time that they were really good, when they went to back-to-back championship games in 2009 and 2010, they had an outstanding roster and still didn't have a quarterback that they fully trusted. Right? If they had a legit quarterback on that team, I think they probably would have won a Super Bowl because they had the best offensive line in the NFL. They had the best running game in the NFL. If they didn't have the best defense in the NFL, they had a top 3 defense. They had the singular best defensive player in the NFL in Darrelle Revis.
Yeah.
But they've never been able. And then as the rest of the roster kind of deteriorated and they lost, and now what's the quickest way to rehabilitate your organization as you go downhill, hitting it with a quarterback? They were never able to hit it with a quarterback. Or at least when they hit it with, I thought they had hit it with Sam Darnold, they never supplemented the rest of the roster with enough talent to prove that he could do it.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of, they've been, to me, in that spin cycle of never marrying roster and quarterback. And that's how you end up where you end up in the NFL. I mean, you're in one of two places in the NFL. You either have a quarterback or you're looking. And that seems like where they've always been.
Rex Ryan has not been shy about the fact that he'd be interested in coming back to the Jets. Do you think that's a potential reunion that makes some sense?
I mean, Woody likes Rex. Really, I would say he borderline loved Rex. I think that's why Rex stayed the head coach as long as he did.
Yeah.
But I think some revisionist history. I mean, I loved Rex. Nobody got along with Rex better than I did. Nobody enjoyed interviewing Rex more than I did. He is a character of the highest degree. He was a ton of fun to be around. A brilliant defensive mind. Almost in all of those press conferences that he held, became kind of such a showman and a caricature that how brilliant a defensive mind he was got lost in the shuffle. Probably almost underrated because it kind of became about like the next stunt he was going to pull in a press conference.
Yeah.
But I do think, to be fair, Rex came in and was handed a roster that was built by Mike Tannenbaum and Eric Mangini. Like, those two guys built a roster that was filled with leadership and character, good guys that maybe needed the personality of Rex to stir the pot and to get them ready to run through a wall. He took that roster to back-to-back championship games. He didn't build that roster. He inherited that roster. It's like a president being handed a great economy and then taking credit for the great economy, right? Like, he was handed that roster. Then in year 3, when any roster starts to change, Mike Tannenbaum's walking down the hall asking Rex, hey, what do you think about bringing Plexico Burris here? What do you think about bringing Santonio Holmes here? What do you think about bringing Derek Mason here? What do you think about this guy and that guy? And Rex is like, yeah, yes, all for it. Do it. Bring that guy. And the locker room went off a cliff. So now maybe Rex would learn from those mistakes. Like, a lot of times, coaches learn from previous mistakes and get better. And he might be a totally different coach and a completely different mindset the next time around if he were to come back to the Jets. But like, Rex didn't build the locker room. Rex inherited a great locker room and did his part to dismantle it. And that had a lot to do with why the team lost. He had a hand in that. So like that needs to be said, I think, as well, before everybody looks back with rose-colored glasses at Rex as a head coach, and everybody's like, oh, yeah, get this regime out of here and bring back the good old days of Rex. Well, the good old days of the Rex Ryan regime had everything to do with the roster he inherited. And let's not forget how the locker room went off a cliff once he started, I think, to put his thumb on the scale a little bit and started to influence how the locker room was built going forward. And then, the John Idzik regime overlapped with Rex. He did not see eye to eye in any way, shape, or form with John Idzik about how to build the team, who to draft. Those two were then on complete islands, So like the next general manager would also have to be very much of the same mindset as a Rex Ryan of how to build the team, and that's, again, like, personality clashes happen. It certainly happened when John Idzik was the GM and Rex was the coach.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot to consider before everybody just says, because it's easy to get, like, absence makes the heart grow fonder. Let's look back and, the last time the Jets were in the playoffs, it was with Rex Ryan. Everything must have been great with Rex. Let's just bring him back. There's a lot of branches to that tree to consider before it's just this easy decision to go back to like the halcyon days of Rex and bring him back and make him the head coach again.
What kind of access do you get as the radio voice of the team? Like, do you talk to players and coaches during the week? Are you around the locker room? Like, are you able to get a sense of what the vibe is with the team in the locker room?
Yeah, I mean, I interview the coach every week, talk to him. I'm busy too.
Yeah.
Like, I call NHL every week. I got college football every week. I'm on the road. So, I am certainly not a beat writer. I'm not in that locker room, having like kind of off the record conversations at guys' lockers every day. So there are enough people that I talk to where I feel like I've got a decent feel and a little bit of a heartbeat of the team. But no, am I like living in the locker room every day? No, I am not. I am not doing that.
What is the sense you get in terms of how Aaron Rodgers fits in the locker room and how he's received by his teammates?
Well, I mean, he's got a lot of his guys there.
Yeah.
The feeling I've always got, maybe it's changed as the year has gone on, is he walks into that locker room and it's almost like, for these guys, like a Garrett Wilson, a Breece Hall, an Elijah Vera Tucker, a Joe Tippmann, it's literally like video game walking into the locker room. It's like the guy that was on the cover, the guy that they grew up watching. And there's probably a little bit of disbelief of, I think they thought that he would just wave his magic wand over everything and everything would be okay.
Yeah.
And the fact that it hasn't just automatically been okay is probably more of a shock to them than anything else.
How did Brett Favre fit in the locker room?
That was so brief. He came in like right at the end of training camp.
Yeah.
It wasn't like the whole offseason, it was basically one half of one season. He played 11 games, got hurt, and then the season went off a cliff, and then it was over. So they were 8-3, though. Everything was great in that locker room. Remember, that was a totally different year. If you go back to that season, they were winning, and then he got hurt, and then it fell apart. So there was, when they were 8-3, it was nothing but good vibes, and it was rolling in that locker room.
I think they were 8-3, and
team.
they beat the Titans, who I think were 10-0 at the time.
And I think they beat the Patriots as well.
Yeah.
I think, like, they beat the Patriots, obviously. That was right in the middle of all of the Patriots' glory, right? Like, that was 6 years into the Tom Brady run of, being a Super Bowl contender. And that was, obviously the Patriots had another decade and a half of success out in front of them. But the Patriots had already established themselves a championship-level team. And, yes, they beat an undefeated Titans team on the road.
Yeah.
They were 8-3, and then he got hurt. Didn't tell anybody he got hurt. You could tell he was hurt, but he wanted the streak.
Yeah.
He wanted that Lou Gehrig consecutive games played streak to stay alive, and he played hurt. He couldn't throw, and the season fell apart.
How do you think Rodgers has done handling the media in New York? I mean, there was so much when they first traded for him and brought him from Green Bay. Just there was a lot of people thought that it was going to be a big issue, Rodgers versus the New York media. How do you think that's gone?
He's handled it as well as you can handle it for being 3-8.
Yeah.
No one handles the media well in New York when you're losing. I mean, that's just like you're going to get your pinata, and that's the way it's going to go. You're going to get pilloried on the talk shows, right? The beat writers are going to be writing articles about what a terrible season it is. Everyone is going to be competing for a one-liner, a quote, a headline. They're going to be listening to the McAfee show every Tuesday to try and grab a one-liner out of that. They're going to be looking for, an off-the-record, unnamed quote from someone. That's just the nature of being here. That's why it's so hard to lose here. But that's why if you were ever able to win here, you become Derek Jeter. You become Mark Messier, right? Like you win here and you become something that you basically can't be anywhere else. And that's the allure because they see what those guys, like the pedestal forever that those guys are put on when you win here. And especially like a Messier with the Rangers, if you're able to do it with the Jets, you would be held in that, like on that level, in that regard. I mean, look, Joe Namath still doesn't have to buy a dinner in New York. 55 years later, the guy is still eating for free. So it's, but at the same time, like, the danger, of course, that you have to live with is it's a competitive media landscape. It's not Green Bay. It's not Jacksonville. It's not 3 or 4 people a day covering your team and kind of being friendly to you because they're the only 3 or 4 people a day that are covering your team. And, there's more of a competition here for the hot take back page quote. So, if you're losing, that's just part of the deal.
Because of that competition for the hot take back page quote, do you think the Jets mind those appearances by Rodgers on the Pat McAfee show?
I mean, maybe they do, but I mean, what are you going to do?
Right.
Like he's allowed to do interviews with whoever he wants to do interviews with on his day off. Right. So, I mean, guys do paid appearances. There are other guys, like coaches have done paid appearances on talk shows in New York for years. Quarterbacks have done paid appearances. Like Eli Manning did a Monday spot on Afternoon Drive Sports Radio in New York City for years. It's just it's not unusual that a guy does that. So,
yeah,
I mean, obviously you'd rather, I'm sure, the less the better. But they would love, if they were 8-3, they'd love it. Now you're on every week being celebrated and being lauded and having bouquets thrown at you. So, the way I'm sure they envisioned this back in August was, how great is this?
Yeah.
On the Pat McAfee show every Tuesday, we're going to have a national platform for our quarterback to go on there and be have bouquets thrown at him and talk about the impending trip to the Super Bowl. And it just hasn't worked out that way.
How is working with Anthony Beck this season with Marty Lyons retiring?
It's the best possible landing spot that I could have imagined for the hardest, way for 22 years of ending a relationship with like one of your best friends.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I just loved working with Marty. I miss him to death. He still comes to the games, so I still get a chance to see him. But seeing him for 10 minutes before the game in the booth or for 10 minutes hanging out with him on the field is not the same as doing the game with him. Or even the other things. Like I travel every Saturday for college football. So most Saturdays, I am racing from a college football stadium to get on a plane to fly to wherever the Jets are to get in at midnight. But on the odd week where the stars align and I can get in at 7 or 8 o'clock, or when college football ends and there's still 4 or 5 Jet games left, and a couple are on the road, and I get to go to dinner on Saturday night with the crew, or every Sunday morning, sitting on the bus just for the bus ride over to the game. Marty and I would go to the very back of the bus, and we'd sit together for 22 years. Now I'm on the back of the bus alone. Because Anthony comes from Tampa because he lives there, and then he grabs a rental car and runs to the airport and zooms back to Tampa. So, like, those things that nobody sees or nobody know about, I miss that.
Yeah.
It's different. That's never going to be the same. But having said that, like, if anybody met Anthony or knows Anthony, you are not going to meet a nicer or better guy than Anthony Beck. I mean, as nice as you think he is, multiply it times 10, and that's how nice he is. So to now work with him, it's the best possible landing spot I could have hoped for. But I'll never not miss Marty.
Is it different being on 104.3 versus ESPN New York, or is that really not have an impact on the broadcast or anything?
I mean, like when you're calling the game, you call the game. I hope fans have mostly come and found us. I'm sure the difference is, on an all sports radio station, you've got football talk shows being listened to by football fans leading up to your pregame show. And then all of a sudden it's okay, here's the Jet pregame show. And then it rolls right into the broadcast. And, and all week it's every show is throwing promos out there. Remember, we're the home of the Jets and the game starts on Sunday. And this is when you can hear, Dan Grassa and Greg Buttle. And this is when the game starts. Remember, Sundays at 1 o'clock, Sundays at 4, there's shoulder programming. Like there's that's missed, when you're on a rock station. I mean, they're playing Bohemian Rhapsody, and then all of a sudden, boom, the Jet pregame starts. Yeah. So that's different. But the folks at 104.3 have been awesome, super supportive, given us everything that we possibly could have asked for. And it's not like splitting the atom. Like there have been other relationships in other markets on non-sports talk radio stations with teams. I mean,
yeah,
far more often than there have been on all sports radio stations.
Yeah, no, it's definitely becoming it's been more common just with because not every sports station is on an FM dial, and teams kind of prioritize that. So there's certainly other. I know the Ravens have been on a rock station for a long time.
We do the games, and we hope that there's enough promotion out there that folks come and find us and listen to the games.
Yeah. What is the travel like? You mentioned having to go from college football to Jets games on Sunday. Have you ever had a close call? Like, has there been a time where your Saturday night flight was canceled and then Sunday morning you were racing to get somewhere?
Yes. Absolutely.
What was the closest call?
I did a game in North Carolina a few years ago, I remember, where the game just went long and missed the flight. It was the last flight out. And now you're in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and the next day the Jets are in Cleveland. And am I driving to Cleveland, or am I calling my boss and saying, here are my options? I could drive to Cleveland. And he's like, no, don't fall asleep at the wheel. I don't, there's not enough Starbucks to get you through that drive. I said, well, here I can go to Washington. It's like hours or whatever it was, get a airport hotel, sleep for like 3 hours, get on the first flight. I'll land in Cleveland at 10:30 in the morning and run to the state. Yes, okay, I trust the plane will go. So did it, made it. Sweat when I got there. Things like that happen.
Do you know who the backup announcer would be in a situation like that?
Well, for home games, I mean, Dan Grassa's there.
Yeah.
He hosts our pre and post game show, and they, of course, are on site. For road games, I don't really know what they necessarily would do because they're not there. Like, we don't travel a pre and post game show because they're on the air for 2 hours after the game's over. Well, an hour and a half after the game's over, not only is the equipment packed up, we're on the bus, we're going to the airport. Like, they're on the air. Our plane is in the air coming home, and they haven't even wrapped up the post-game show yet. So we're obviously not traveling those guys to road games. So we have not had to go to the nuclear option of trying to find someone in the press box to come, cover for me. But ESPN has always been as good as they can be about looking at where the Jets are on Sunday and saying, okay, look, what are the realistic options?
Oh, okay.
We can get you from point A to point B. And at least if option A doesn't work, there's an option B on Sunday morning,
right.
There's a backup, so, and most of the time, when you think about it, college football is a August through Thanksgiving sport, basically regular season. That's not a snowstorm time of year.
Yeah.
That's not an ice storm time of year, right? Like blizzards are mostly January, February, ice storms in March. Like when you're a college basketball announcer, as I have been, that's where you really get into some hairy travel situations. Thankfully, football, I mean, even Thanksgiving, 90% of the country is not worried about a blizzard, so it's usually been okay. Like you're looking at the forecast saying, other than being in August and September and worrying about a hurricane hitting somewhere where college football might be taking place, it's always seemed to work out.
Yeah. Were you supposed to be working with RG3 again this season, or did you already have another partner?
We never know.
Oh, okay.
Never official. You know what I mean? Like, obviously, I'm sure for, Kirk Herbstreit and Chris Fowler, they've been together forever. They kind of know. Maybe some other, but my role, I've never really advanced past quote unquote number 5 guy or number 4 guy. I mean, that's always kind of been my plateau at ESPN. And if you go back through my ESPN history, starting in 2004 or 2005, whenever I started, that's about right. I worked with Brock Heward for 5 years, a 5-year run. I worked with Dan Orlovsky for 3 years, and then he got enough Monday Night Football and it's so much football, studio programming that it just became almost untenable for him to do all of it. Those are the only guys I think I've worked with consecutive years. I had a 10-year run. I had 10 different partners in 10 years. So I never assume.
Yeah.
I go into every offseason wondering when I'm going to get the call as to who my partner is going to be the following year. Now, I couldn't have asked for better this year. Louis Riddick is.
Yeah.
You want to talk about prepared. I mean, he is, he does the draft. Well, I mean, look, the guy was a finalist for NFL GM jobs.
Yeah.
And how are you possibly going to do better than that? Right? Like, this is a guy where Wednesday, he knows if, guard for, the left guard for Ole Miss has good or bad footwork. Right? Like, he is drilled down.
Yeah.
So nothing gets past him. If I'm doing a game with Louis Riddick, there is no question I can ask, no element of the game I can go to where I'm going to be like, oh, I might stump him here. I might put him in a bad spot. I might ask a question he might not know the answer to. He might not be prepared to talk about this. Maybe I shouldn't go there. I can ask him anything. I can ask him about the punter, the long snapper, whether the gunners are any good. Like he knows every single football thing I can throw at him. He's ready for it. So, as a play-by-play guy, you can't ask for more than that.
What were your thoughts when ESPN got the NHL back? Was that something that you knew you wanted to be a part of?
Oh, yeah. I never really dared to dream that they would. My first regular play-by-play was as a backup voice of the Rangers before I got the Jets job. I was at WFAN, kind of plateaued there. They had made multiple changes to their daily lineup. I was just flat out told I wouldn't be considered for any of them. And I was in a position where I was like, well, I can stay here and just be a jack of all trades guy and like forever be like an update guy, occasional talk show host, go cover events, but never be considered one of the guys that going to get a real talk show job. And that's an avenue to go in New York. I mean, to have a piece of real estate in New York City as a talk show host, it's a fun job.
Yeah.
Get to watch the games and yell at callers and spout your opinion. And I've got plenty of opinions. But I did really like play-by-play. The Jet radio rights went to Madison Square Garden, so I did as well, but I was still only the pregame, postgame host. So I went to Madison Square Garden and sat with Mike McCarthy, who back then was running MSG Network, and I said, I've really kind of hit a wall at WFAN. They're just not interested in me for any advancement. And he was like, well, we would love to have you here. And I was like, play-by-play, in some way, shape, or form, I'd love to have that be a part of what I do. He said, well, if I did a lot of hockey in college. He said, well, we have a need as like kind of someone to fill in on Rangers because Kenny Albert and Sam Rosen back then both did a lot of Fox football. So they would miss games on the weekends. So there'd be 20, 25 Rangers games a year that would need to be filled. I was like, oh, sign me up for that. I mean, I grew up as a diehard Rangers fan as well. And I had not had really any play-by-play portfolio to point towards. So I had a chance to call Rangers games, mostly on the radio, handful on TV, and it went well. And then I got some ESPN work. Literally, almost like right by the year, as I became a full-time ESPN employee, it was like ships passing in the night. I went to ESPN, and the NHL rights maybe the year before went to NBC. And now I'm at ESPN, which is still great.
Yeah.
College football, college basketball. I have the Jets job. I mean, I've got plenty of great play-by-play, but really missed hockey. I spent 15 years at ESPN. There was never a thought it was coming back.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, 5 years ago, it's in the wind. Wait, the NHL contract is up. It's coming to an end at NBC. Doesn't look like NBC Sports Network is going to continue even as a channel. ESPN is going to be in on this. They're going to ask, they're going to bid on this. And then you find out this is real. They're going to get this. And then my boss on some of the things I'm working on, and now our boss, like in totality for production at ESPN, Mike McQuaid, was running the golf that I was a part of, the PGA coverage that we do. And we were at Kiowa Island. Covering the PGA, and I walked into his office. And if anybody that knows Mike McQuaid, the story will not surprise you. I walked in and I said, I know you're knee deep and neck deep in the golf this week, but I'd love to be a part of hockey. It's a passionate sport for me. And he was like, oh no, you'll be involved. Oh. Okay. He's like, yeah, you're on my list. You're going to be involved. We'll talk about it later. I was like, okay, well, great meeting. I really feel like we've bonded. We've grown a lot closer here, and I'll see you later. And he kind of laughed. But if you know Mike McQuaid, like that's a Mike McQuaid meeting. There's no BS. There's no politics. It's just he tells you what he wants and tells you what he thinks, and boom. And if he would told me I wasn't going to be involved, he probably would have said it right there and then as well. No, you're not involved. And okay, that would have been disappointing, and I would have walked out. But that was it. And so he had remembered me as someone that called hockey because he's obviously been at ESPN forever.
Yeah.
And was a New York area person and remembered listening to me call games on the radio and was like, oh yeah, that's somebody that we actually have in our stable that has a hockey background. And so that's kind of where that came from. And I knew I missed it. I wasn't even probably fully appreciative of how much I missed it until I had the chance to call it again.
Yeah.
And now I can't get enough of it. Now I can't wait for my next game to pop up. It's just the best.
What was your first year calling the Jets?
My first year calling all of the games was
full time.
2002.
Okay. That's
2002. It was like 98 or 99 because Howard David preceded me. And he was the voice of Monday Night Football, the Super Bowl, the playoffs, and everything on Westwood.
Yeah.
So he had the national call on Westwood, but he also called the Jets. And he also called the Celtics on radio in Boston. He had all those jobs simultaneously. So somehow he had worked out a deal with the Jets where he could miss a certain number of games if necessary.
Okay.
So wherever there were crossovers, if the Jets were on Monday Night Football or, he had missed too many Celtics games and needed to hit a Celtics game and there was I don't know, whatever the deal was. I just remember, we're talking, 25 years ago. He would miss a couple of games a year and I would sub in and call like a game, maybe 3. So that went on for like 2 or 3 years. And then when he left, after way too much politics, after way too much sweating it out, after reading in the paper somebody else got the job, I actually ended up getting the job after all. I thought I was going to.
Who was that somebody else?
Eric Reed, the TV voice of the Miami Heat.
Okay.
Yeah. It was, I guess the story I could tell now because all the players at this point have moved on. But there was a guy named Jay Cross who was the team president of the Miami Heat. And Jay was a stadium builder and a brilliant one at that. He built Air Canada Center as the team president of the Raptors when he was in Toronto. Then the Heat hired him, and he was their team president and built American Airlines Arena or whatever down in Bayside where, the Heat play. The Jets hired him to be team president because this was back when it was in its infancy that the Jets were going to build a new stadium. And on top of building a new stadium, it was like the Olympics effort where New York was going to get the Summer Olympics in like 2012. And they were going to build an Olympic stadium on the west side of Manhattan. And that was going to become where the Jets were going to play. And it would have been spectacular. If they would have done it, it would have been this retractable roof, incredible stadium on the west side of Manhattan. And that was going to be he was going to spearhead that effort. And really, without knowing me, without knowing any of the history of any of it, he came up from the Miami Heat basically at the exact same time that Howard David left and was like, oh, well, the guy that calls the Heat games in Miami is a huge Jets fan. He would love this job. I'll make him the radio announcer. And all of a sudden, I had been sitting there for like 6 years as the backup voice.
Yeah.
And as the pre- and post-game host, thinking the moment that, Howard David left, 5 minutes later, I would get a phone call saying, congratulations, you're the guy. Well, no. Not only did I not get the phone call, there was like a 2 or 3 month process that apparently went through where then, like, it was put in the paper that I didn't have the job. It was just a matter-of-fact blurb in the paper. Eric Reed, the voice of the Miami Heat, is now the new radio voice of the New York Jets. And I said, if this is true, I'm done with the Jets. My relationship with I'm not going to do the pre- and post-game show. If I didn't get the play-by-play job, I'm out. I'll go do something else. So that day, my relationship with the Jets almost ended permanently. But it's funny. The day that blurb came out, I was going to Long Island for MSG to call an arena football game, of all things. And our halftime guest was going to be Terry Bradway, who at the time was the Jets GM.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, my God. I just read in the paper that I'm not getting the job. And in like 5 hours, the Jet general manager is going to be my halftime guest at this stupid arena football game. Are you kidding me? So now I have been gut punched, but I have to suck it up. I have to go out there. I have to call this game. So Terry Bradway comes in the booth. Hey, how you doing? I'm like, I'm not good. Like, why? What's wrong? I said, you can't be happy to see me. He goes, what are you talking about? I said, I didn't get the job. What are you talking about? I said, it's in the paper. I have the paper in my bag. I didn't get the job. He goes, that's not true. I said, I'll show you the article if you want me to show the article. He goes, no, I'm not saying it's not in the paper. I'm saying I'm in all of those meetings, or I know what's being said in those meetings, and I'm just telling you nothing's done. It's not true. Hang in there. I was like, oh, okay. Instead of going like scorched earth, like yelling at everybody with the Jets to go to hell, I was given like a new lease on life, and it was like another 2 months after that.
Oh, wow.
I would say that I finally ended up getting the job, but it was not an easy process.
Yeah.
It was like a layup. It was like I had to sweat it out for like 4 or 5 months before it finally worked out. We did auditions and all kinds of things, and then eventually, it did work out. But I give Terry Bradway and my old boss Bob Parenti, who was with the Jets for like 40 years. They were really the voices behind the scenes, I think, that more than anything, pushed the ball down the field on my behalf.
And was Don LaGreca up for that job? Because I feel they mention that sometimes on the K show.
I don't think so. I don't remember that. No, the funny part about that, it is funny. So they call me like I stole a job from Don LaGreca. They make fun of me for that.
Yes.
So Don used to host a show with Terry Bradway out on Long Island. And then they made me host that show. Now, Don and I both live in New Jersey. The show was done at the Marriott, like next to Jet training camp at Hofstra.
Yeah.
On a Monday night.
Yeah.
Well, where do you think a guy from New Jersey wants to go less at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon?
Right. It's like a 3-hour drive.
Oh my God. So, but they made fun of me because as I swiped the job away from Don LaGreca, right? Like he wanted to go from New Jersey out to Long Island.
That's where that stems from.
Yeah. So yeah, we always laugh at that, but whatever. They can always, it's good for a bit. So I've always let them call me like the weasel or whatever, taking his job away.
And then am I correct in remembering, did you do a call-in talk show on MSG?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, with Bill Daughtry.
Yes, with Daughtry, right.
2 years. It was like a 2-year. So basically what happened there was that was the birth of the Yes Network.
Right.
So Mike and the Mad Dog, that was when Mike and the Mad Dog were going to get simulcast. And there was apparently a deal in the works where they're going to get simulcast on MSG. And then all of a sudden now the Yes Network is born. They're going to get the Yankees. And they apparently came in with a bigger check to like establish their real estate. Not only as having the Yankees, but they get Mike and the Mad Dog. They put Mike and the Mad Dog on the Yes Network. So somehow MSG's answer to combating Mike and the Mad Dog being on TV every day was to put me and Bill Daughtry on TV only. We weren't even on the radio. We were only on television doing this talk show.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people watched it? I have no idea. We might have been talking to ourselves half the time.
At the time, I was probably in like 8th or 9th grade, and when I would get home, I'd put Mike and the Mad Dog on, and during a commercial, I'd go up one channel, and I had this faint memory. I was like, I'm pretty sure that was Bob and Bill Daughtry, but there's not that much information about it online, so I wasn't sure.
Commercial cover when Mike and the Mad Dog were in break, somebody may stumble upon us. That's probably somehow we were their competition.
Yeah,
probably not very good competition.
And then I was listening to Beningo over the weekend, and he mentioned that you had worked on, I guess, as an update anchor on his show overnight at times, because he called out, he said, you, Andrew Catalan, Spiro Dides, Ian Eagle, and Kevin Burkhardt, he had said it all worked on his overnight show at one point or another.
Incorrect. Never did an update on Joe's show.
Interesting.
Never
he definitely said mentioned your name there, and it was almost like treating it as like the Joe Beningo announcing tree.
No, it's funny. Filled in for Joe.
Okay.
It actually, I didn't get Joe's job, and it turned out to be maybe one of the better things for my career in a backhanded way. I'm in Miami, working radio in Miami, my first job out of college. Of course, I want to come back to WFAN. I was an intern there. I'm a New York guy. I care passionately about New York sports. Thought I wanted to be a talk show host at the time. Steve Summers is being taken off of overnight radio. And I want to audition for the overnight job. So I am given permission to go up to overnight audition for that job. And I fly up, I do 2 nights. One of the 2 nights I was on the air was the night Mickey Mantle passed away. So one of the 2 nights that I'm there to audition, like the entire show turns into, like, at the time, 50-year-old guys calling and weeping because Mickey Mantle has passed away and just sharing Mickey Mantle memories. So God bless the Mick, but it kind of took away one of my nights to audition because what am I going to do?
Yeah, tough one to show off
about
on.
the Knicks. Yeah, like I can't really. I mean, it's about Mickey Mantle, so I really only had 1 night to audition. But apparently, the show that I did was good enough that I was told it came down to me and Joe. The only 2. We were the 2 finalists, and they gave it to Joe. God bless him. He won the audition and he got the job. I think a big reason he got the job was it was an awesome story that this guy who was like a caller who won a contest, who got on the air and now gets the overnight job. So he got the job and killed it, right? Like built a career off of it. Amazing. Yeah. But because I didn't get that job, I go back down to Miami, and now I'm sitting in Miami thinking I'm never going to get out of Miami. I mean, I'm stuck in Miami forever. I didn't beat out a guy who was a caller and a contest winner for the overnight job. What does that say about what my prospects are? Well, about 2 or 3 months later, I'm trying to get out of Miami to move somewhere else, and I'm sending tapes other places, and my boss, Eric Spitz, assistant program director at the time at FAN, says, why don't you just come back here and work for us part-time and do like whatever I ask you to do? I'm like, oh, I didn't even know that was a possibility. He's like, no, like there might be weeks where I've got 1 or 2 shifts. There might be weeks where I've got 9 shifts, but there'll be enough that if you live at home for a while and we'll see how it works out, but I can keep you going. I was like, that's all I need to hear. I packed the car and drove home. And then any talk shows that I hosted, and I did updates for Mike and the Mad Dog. I did updates during the day. I would get sent to cover the Super Bowl. I would get sent to cover spring training. But any talk shows that I did weren't overnight.
Yeah.
They were, like the 7 to midnight shift. So I was probably on the air much less frequently. But anytime I was on, I was talking to a massively bigger audience that I would have been talking to at 3 a.m. So the way it was almost kind of like in a backdoor way, it worked out. Like I got probably a higher profile role than the overnight job. Right. Had I won the overnight job, I would have been on overnight, but it would have been a lower profile job. So yeah, in a way, it kind of worked out probably the best of all worlds for all of us. And then Joe took that job and did so well at it. And what that overnight job really is it's a constant audition for the decision makers there so that when a daytime job opens up, you've proved you can do a really hard talk show job, which is talking 5 hours by yourself overnight. Well, now, hell, if you can do that, you can host any day part. Partner? 2 in the afternoon? You're damn right you can do that if you hosted overnight and killed it for, however many years.
Right, with actual sports news breaking and things like that.
So, it worked out great for everybody involved, I think.
Yeah. Good stuff, Bob. Thank you so much.
Never an update guy for Joe.
Yeah, good to know. Interesting little note that he dropped there that was incorrect. Yeah. It is interesting though that FAN that they thought of you as being like it potentially having that overnight job, and then a couple years later saying no, you've plateaued and you're never going to get another.
The midday job at FAN changed like 4 times in my time there, 3 times in my time there, and I was never even given a chance to audition for it.
Yeah,
the midday job, not drive time.
Yeah,
so when that happens, at some point, reality smacks you in the face, and you're like, oh, well, if you're never even going to let me audition for the midday job, then I'm spinning my wheels. I might as well look outside and see what else is out there. And it opened up a door to MSG and television and play-by-play, and so it definitely worked out.
Yeah. Bob, you were great. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. I appreciate you having me. Hopefully my announcing isn't awful, at least in the future. So thanks.
That is Bob Wischusen. I'm Brandon Contes. This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Please rate and subscribe to this podcast. Please also subscribe to Awful Announcing's YouTube page. But regardless of how you consume Awful Announcing and the Awful Announcing Podcast, thanks for listening and be good.
Thanks for listening to the Awful Announcing Podcast. For the latest news spanning the sports media landscape and more, check out awfulannouncing.com and follow us at Awful Announcing.